Si plusieurs croient au potentiel de Détroit, d'autres s'interrogent encore sur la manière de rebâtir une ville inclusive. Pour l'artiste et activiste Bryce Detroit, il est essentiel que le passé et la violence systémique soient reconnus pour bâtir l'avenir. On est avec Bryce Detroit aujourd'hui, un afrofuturiste, entertainment justice pioneer. Nice to meet you, Bryce.
Yes, great to meet you.
So we got here yesterday, and if we want the history of Detroit in the last decades, could you explain a little bit of that to me?
So what we see today in 2020 Detroit is, it's interesting. This is a for sure result of intentional economic violence enacted through policy and legislation over a number of decades. Detroit is a home historically of technological innovation, cultural and artistic innovation, as well as social innovation, ever since the labor movements.
Yep.
So this is a moment in time where the future of, the future in terms of the way that folks will think in decolonial ways, the future in terms of the way that folks on a grassroots neighborhood person-to-person level are actually building relationships for the purpose of healing and sustainability, growth, future. So it's a dynamic time, and this is like a real important moment on the clock of the world, for real. Yeah.
And so what led up to all of this?
Depends on how far you want to go back.
Specifically in Detroit, let's say, well, you can expand as
So
you wish.
first
Yeah.
want to acknowledge that this is Anishinaabe territory. Anishinaabe is a First Nations indigenous people to this area. As a diasporic African, it's important for me and meaningful to acknowledge the indigenous people to the place that you're in. We've had a series. I'm going to explain it like this. I'm going to pull out maybe 500 years real quick, just to, because it's a unique situation that we're in here, and it helps me to look at it this way. The diasporic Africans that were initially brought to Detroit were a part of America's slavery economy, and it was all to the point of being this free labor force. The point is, though, that perspective sets this precedent for the way that diasporic African or Black people would be politically and socially cast into society. So fast forward a couple hundred years and we're in 1910s. We have this phenomenon called the Great Migration. All of these diasporic African peoples coming from the South moving to the North for the promise of these $5 a day jobs, working in car factories. What they were met with was a racial environment that not only mirrored what they were experiencing in the South, but it had the added layer of now you're no longer even at home. These jobs that were being advertised for everybody, there's still this deep embedded racism, so these jobs don't even exist for you. And then the jobs that you do have access to are the worst labor conditions. So it's American dream that folks thought they were able to buy into by moving to Detroit and being a part of this automotive industrial revolution. Yeah, they were met with institutionalized racism in the form of legislative policy, as well as labor policies. Like there's a famous rebellion that happened in a Dodge Chrysler plant. The first riot, the first direct action, that's my activist language, because riots is a word, this is from a media literacy perspective. It was a non-response by the auto industry, by the city at the time, which was still majority white. No one was stepping up in support of this growing Black population that literally had the worst labor conditions. So it's like, it's justified that there is this
anger,
critique, there's this critical perspective, and there is a demand for a for real resolution. Like we have to solve this shit because we are supporting this entire industrial engine, which is Detroit. So just want to make a note that that's speaking to the degree of political education that has always existed amongst the labor force in Detroit. in a very real way. So,
was it an effort to create unions or?
Yes, that's where the union movement came out of it, for sure on the black side. The significant black labor movements that would then end up being emulated around the country, they were born out of those conditions in the factories of Detroit. My people responding as passionately as possible to the socioeconomic environment. That being unaddressed in a significant way is what created the powder keg that would blow in 1967. A lot of the mainstream stories makes it seem like it was just this thing that kind of just happened because there was this illegal activity happening on an underground scene and the cops came to create order, something went wrong, and then all of a sudden you have this riot. No. That was just like, all right, that's the straw. The camel's back is broken.
Which is legitimate.
Super legitimate, especially when, at that time, you're getting more black aesthetic. You're getting more and more funk. You're getting more and more soul in the way that corporations were marketing their products to white people. At the height of the black music industry, it was creating wealth that rivaled what folks were making in the plants. People were creating middle-class lifestyles for themselves off of Detroit music economy. So that's a myth buster in itself too. Like, no. Our ancestors had a robust economy. Shout out Black Bottom, shout out Paradise Valley.
Dans les années 30 et 40, les quartiers Black Bottom et Paradise Valley étaient considérés comme des centres névralgiques pour les commerçants et communautés noires de Détroit. Aujourd'hui, ces quartiers n'existent plus et sont devenus des symboles du capitalisme radical et du racisme systémique américain.
Have come into my activism as an entertainment artist, especially those of us who are media-based organizers. Our work is creating these stories.
Taking the power back.
Absolutely. Asserting our power. And that's an important note too. Because black and brown people, diasporic, African and indigenous people in America, we came out of our mother's wombs being told that we were conquered peoples. We were told since we came out that we were the minority, when in fact we're the global majority, and we're not conquered. Like, our entire ancestral history is not as a conquered people. This is a very small amount of time. Yet, the majority of my people on Earth are locked into the stories that just happened in the last 1,000 years. Totally disconnected from their own stories and points of identity that have existed for tens and hundreds of thousands of years. So this is not about taking back power, because power was never taken from us. What did happen though was violence, systematic violence over an extended period of time that was used to persuade, coerce people to adopting an entire new worldview. And in that, we disconnected from our true power, which is our identity and our indigenous ancestral culture. So going into the 21st century, 2000, we have this story of Detroit that's on everybody's TV. Crime this, unemployment that, corruption has brought the city to its knees. Detroit is done. Like, that was the major story. Like, Detroit's over, yo. Like, they killed it. They killed Detroit. That is when, for me, we began to hear this story of Detroit needs saving. So that was an invitation for people outside to start moving into Detroit, because we've already told you that Detroit died, and we showed you all the pictures of the cemeteries of Detroit. So that means that not only is there nobody here, but there's a lot of fucking land. There's a lot of homes for people who have resources and who, the motherfuckers that be represented on HGTV, the people that they show doing a home improvement. I'm just gonna take $80,000 and fix her upper. It's all bare bones, but like that kind of shit. Like, it brought all of those people from around the country here with this dream of buying a $500 home and being able to pump $50K into it that they absolutely have access to via disposable income or being able to plug into loans and shit. And then cats are able to plant their flag on this new frontier, colonial framing, which is Detroit. But to hear that shit in a place that already was colonized, it's just like, whoa. We have some folks who are entering neighborhoods who are straight up on some colonizer Lewis and Clark shit, like land of opportunity. Yeah. And then you have other people with beautiful hearts who were like surprised that there were actually people on the block because they literally
bought into the narrative.
They 100% bought into the shit. So on an activist level though, a lot of us do this work creating tools for white-bodied people to be able to analyze their own shit, question and challenge their own shit, so that when they're choosing to enter Black and brown spaces, at least you're doing so with some very real awareness and some presence of mind.
Consciousness of
like some real
facts.
Consciousness though.
Yeah. So we talked a lot about the history. Today's Detroit. What does the future look like?
The future of Detroit, so boom. These next 10 years in Detroit are gonna be significant. The thing that's very unique about our collective moment on Earth is critical awareness, healing, decolonizing, and decolonizing, I'm talking about happening for Black body, brown body, and white body peoples. The world has not existed in a time in the last 2,500 years where there was this much access to information, this many people around the planet being negatively impacted in the exact same ways from different classes and races, all feeling that there must be some fundamental change. So for Detroit, the vision looks very bright, yet we are very much so still in some shadow period. We're more savvy about exactly what's going on. Yeah. We are definitely in this moment of transition where we are creating out of the old, the new tools that will build the new infrastructure that will sustain us in our highest humanities as a connected global family. So that's what's happening right now in Detroit. We're doing it sexy as fuck though. You know what I'm saying? We look like this when we're doing it. So, yeah.
L'entrevue de Bryce a eu lieu chez Submerge Records, label culte de Détroit. Merci à Mad Mike. Vous pouvez suivre Bryce sur son Instagram.